For many years, the Galactic Council had been the one organization that connected hundreds of civilizations across the stars. It was not perfect, and its members often argued over politics and trade, but it had helped maintain peace for generations. Most worlds trusted its reports and listened when warnings were issued. That was why many people were surprised when several powerful empires openly rejected one of the most serious alerts the Council had ever announced. The warning was simple, but frightening. Strange signals had been detected far beyond the known regions of space. Entire research stations had suddenly gone silent. Supply ships disappeared without sending distress calls. At first, many believed these events were just accidents. Space was dangerous, and unexpected losses happened from time to time. But the pattern continued. More reports arrived. Colonies stopped responding. Deep space probes vanished. A few damaged vessels managed to return, but their crews could barely explain what had happened. They spoke about impossible shadows, systems going dark, and strange objects moving where nothing should have existed. Scientists working for the Galactic Council spent years studying the evidence. Eventually, they reached a conclusion that worried everyone involved. Something unknown was approaching. Nobody knew exactly what it was, where it came from, or how powerful it might be. But they agreed on one thing. Ignoring the danger would be a terrible mistake. The Council sent warnings across the galaxy and asked every major civilization to begin preparing. They recommended stronger defenses, joint research programs, and emergency plans. Smaller species listened immediately. They trusted the Council because they had little choice. But the most powerful empires saw things differently. Many of their leaders believed the threat was being exaggerated. Some thought the Council wanted more influence over galactic affairs. Others claimed there was no real evidence and that fear was being used to control people. Their news channels mocked the warnings. Political groups argued endlessly. Military commanders refused to waste resources on an enemy nobody had ever seen. In public speeches, powerful officials laughed at the idea that anything could threaten their mighty fleets. Citizens on many worlds followed their leaders and dismissed the entire issue. Businesses continued normally. Trade expanded. Entertainment programs joked about the mysterious threat. Life went on as if nothing unusual was happening. Humanity, however, reacted differently. By this point, humans had earned respect among many civilizations. They were not the strongest species, and they certainly were not the oldest. But humans had built a reputation for taking unusual situations seriously. Their history taught them that disasters often appeared when people became too confident. Human scientists carefully studied the Council's reports. Explorers compared the strange signals with old records. Military experts analyzed every possibility. Nobody claimed they had all the answers, but one idea quickly gained support. If the warnings turned out to be true, waiting until the last moment would be dangerous. Because of that, human governments decided to prepare quietly. New defense stations were built near important systems. Shipyards increased production. Emergency shelters were expanded. Scientists worked closely with researchers from smaller civilizations that shared the same concerns. None of these actions caused panic among ordinary citizens. Life remained peaceful, but preparations continued in the background. Not everyone approved. Several powerful empires openly criticized humanity. They accused humans of spreading fear. Some claimed humanity wanted to increase its influence by pretending to be responsible. Others mocked the resources being spent on defenses instead of trade and expansion. Foreign news broadcasts often described humans as overly cautious. But human leaders ignored the criticism. They remembered lessons from their own history. They knew that being laughed at was far better than being unprepared. As the years passed, strange reports became more frequent. Merchant ships disappeared along remote routes. Mining colonies suddenly lost contact. Automatic warning systems activated without explanation. Even then, many governments refused to change their position. One famous official confidently announced that nothing in the universe could challenge the strength of his empire. His speech was celebrated across dozens of worlds. Meanwhile, deep inside human research centers, experts became increasingly worried. The pattern of disappearances was growing, and it was spreading. Exploration teams sent to investigate often returned with damaged equipment. Sensor recordings showed objects that scientists could not identify. Some recordings simply ended in static. The mystery became impossible to ignore. The Galactic Council held emergency meetings one after another. Representatives argued for weeks. Some demanded immediate action. Others continued insisting that there was no reason for alarm. Human delegates repeatedly supported stronger preparations. They urged everyone to work together before it was too late. Unfortunately, pride stood in the way. Powerful civilizations refused to admit that they might be wrong. To them, preparing for an unknown enemy seemed unnecessary. Months later, a research outpost near the outer regions stopped responding. At first, nobody paid much attention. Then a rescue ship arrived. The crew expected technical problems. Instead, they found silence. The station was empty. No signs of battle, no distress signal, no explanation. The news quickly spread throughout the council. Fear began replacing confidence. Scientists rushed to study every detail. Yet before they could uncover answers, another colony vanished, and then another. People across the galaxy started asking questions their leaders could no longer avoid. What was happening? Where had those people gone? Why were entire settlements disappearing without a trace? Ordinary families grew worried. Parents watched the news with concern. Businesses quietly prepared emergency plans. Travel companies reported cancellations. Even those who once laughed at the warnings began feeling uneasy. But several major empires still refused to accept reality. Their leaders insisted everything remained under control. They promised citizens there was nothing to fear. Humanity continued preparing. Human engineers worked day and night. Researchers cooperated with friendly species. Pilots trained constantly. Medical teams developed emergency systems. Supply networks were strengthened. Nobody celebrated these efforts. Nobody wanted war. People simply hoped they were preparing for something that would never happen. Children still attended school. Families still gathered for holidays. Cities remained full of life. Humanity hoped the council had been wrong. Everyone hoped. Then one day, the hope disappeared. Without warning, communication with an important trade sector suddenly went dark. More than 30 worlds stopped responding. Countless ships vanished from tracking systems. Emergency messages flooded nearby regions. Some transmissions were broken and incomplete. Others ended abruptly. Panic spread faster than anyone had imagined. Entire governments were thrown into confusion. Military fleets rushed toward the affected areas. People everywhere watched news reports with growing fear. For the first time, the leaders who had mocked the Galactic Council's warnings began to understand the seriousness of the situation. Unfortunately, understanding had arrived far too late. Several proud fleets entered the dark region expecting a simple rescue mission. None returned. Their disappearance shocked the galaxy. Confidence turned into fear overnight. Stock markets collapsed. Refugee ships crowded spaceports. Emergency meetings filled every hour. The same officials who had laughed during interviews now struggled to explain what was happening. Questions turned into accusations. Accusations turned into panic. And panic spread everywhere. During those frightening days, one fact became impossible to ignore. Humanity had spent years preparing. Human supply systems were functioning. Defense stations were ready. Research teams had organized massive databases. Evacuation plans already existed. Medical facilities stood prepared. For the first time, civilizations that once mocked humans began looking toward Earth and its allies for answers. Not because humanity had claimed to be superior, not because humans had demanded control, but because they had listened when others refused. And while the galaxy was only beginning to understand the size of the disaster approaching them, human scientists studying the latest reports made a discovery that sent chills through every command center. The mysterious force responsible for the disappearances was not moving randomly. It was advancing. And according to their calculations, the first major wave would reach populated space much sooner than anyone had feared. The countdown had already begun, and this time, there would be no more warnings. The news spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. For generations, many civilizations had believed they were untouchable. Their fleets were powerful, their technology was advanced, and their economies controlled entire regions of space. They had laughed at the warnings and treated the strange disappearances as distant problems. Now those same civilizations were facing something they could not understand. System after system went silent. Trade routes that had existed for centuries suddenly became empty. Ships sent to investigate failed to return. Nobody knew exactly what was coming, but everyone could feel the fear growing. On countless worlds, ordinary families gathered around news screens, hoping to hear good news. Instead, every report seemed worse than the one before. People who had never worried about war or disaster suddenly started preparing emergency supplies. Businesses closed early. Spaceports became crowded with travelers trying to reach safer regions. Schools remained open, but parents constantly checked updates while their children attended classes. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but deep inside, people everywhere were asking the same question. Were they running out of time? The Galactic Council tried to restore order. Emergency meetings continued day and night. Representatives argued over resources, borders, and responsibilities. Some leaders blamed the council itself. Others blamed neighboring empires. Everyone seemed to be searching for someone to accuse instead of focusing on the danger that was approaching. Meanwhile, humanity focused on something completely different: saving lives. Human governments activated emergency programs that had been quietly prepared years earlier. Transport ships began helping civilians escape from endangered regions. Medical stations expanded their capacity. Supply centers started sending food and medicine to worlds already suffering from shortages. Human crews worked around the clock. Nobody asked which species people belonged to. Nobody cared about old disagreements. To human leaders, protecting lives mattered more than politics. This surprised many civilizations. Some of them had spent years criticizing humanity. Some had openly mocked human preparations. Yet now, human ships were arriving with supplies instead of demands. Families who had once viewed humans with suspicion found themselves being rescued by human pilots. Children who had never seen Earth watched human doctors treating patients without expecting anything in return. Slowly, opinions began changing. Smaller civilizations especially remembered who had listened to the warnings and who had ignored them. Many of them voluntarily joined human relief efforts. Scientists shared information. Engineers cooperated. Medical teams exchanged knowledge. For the first time in decades, species that rarely trusted one another started working together. But while cooperation was growing, the situation itself continued getting worse. Several proud empires finally launched major military operations. Their commanders were confident. They believed their massive fleets could solve the problem quickly. Citizens celebrated the departures of their warships. News channels promised victory. But days later, communication was lost. Then more fleets disappeared. The few damaged ships that managed to return carried disturbing reports. Their crews described entire formations vanishing into darkness. Sensors malfunctioned. Navigation systems failed. Experienced officers admitted they had never faced anything like it. The losses shocked the galaxy. People who had once cheered now watched with fear. Confidence was fading. Panic was replacing pride. Human analysts carefully studied every piece of information arriving from survivors. Inside research centers, experts worked without sleep. Engineers examined damaged equipment. Scientists compared thousands of recordings. Military planners updated defense maps every hour. And slowly, a pattern began to appear. The mysterious enemy was not attacking randomly. It had a direction. It was moving toward the populated core regions. Billions of lives were now directly at risk. The discovery changed everything. Human leaders immediately shared the information with the Galactic Council. Some representatives finally accepted reality. Others struggled to admit they had been wrong. But time was running out. Arguments no longer mattered. Action mattered. Humanity proposed the creation of a united defense force. Instead of separate fleets operating independently, every willing civilization would cooperate. Resources would be shared. Information would be exchanged. Civilian protection would become the top priority. Several smaller species agreed immediately. They had already seen human rescue efforts with their own eyes. They trusted humanity. But some powerful empires still hesitated. Their pride had not completely disappeared. They feared losing influence. They feared appearing weak. Yet as more systems went dark, even they realized they had no choice. One by one, they accepted. For the first time in galactic history, civilizations that had once competed against each other stood together. Human commanders coordinated evacuation routes. Alien engineers worked beside human technicians. Medical specialists from dozens of species shared hospitals. Supply ships traveled constantly. Despite the fear surrounding everyone, something unexpected was happening. Hope. Ordinary citizens noticed it. People saw neighbors helping neighbors. Volunteers appeared everywhere. Families opened their homes to refugees. Teachers continued educating children even inside temporary shelters. Musicians performed for displaced communities. Artists created messages encouraging unity. In the middle of uncertainty, kindness survived. Humanity itself faced enormous pressure. Factories worked without rest. Pilots spent months away from home. Doctors barely slept. Scientists practically lived inside laboratories. Many people worried about loved ones serving far from Earth. Children waited for messages from parents assigned to rescue missions. Grandparents comforted frightened families. Nobody knew what tomorrow would bring. But people kept moving forward because they believed giving up was not an option. As the United Defense Force expanded, humanity gained respect throughout the galaxy. Not because humans possessed the strongest weapons. Not because they controlled the largest territory, but because they remained calm when others lost hope. They focused on solutions instead of blame. That attitude inspired many others. Soon, thousands of ships from different civilizations joined the alliance. Communication networks improved. Defense stations were strengthened. Evacuation plans became more organized. For a brief moment, people started believing that maybe they could survive this crisis. Then another disaster struck. One of the largest commercial sectors in the galaxy suddenly came under attack. Millions of civilians depended on that region. Its loss would affect countless worlds. Without hesitation, the United Defense Force moved to protect it. Human crews led evacuation operations while Allied fleets secured escape routes. For days, rescue ships carried civilians to safety. Families were separated. Children cried. Entire communities left behind homes that had existed for generations. Yet, even during those heartbreaking moments, volunteers continued helping one another. Stories of bravery spread everywhere. A transport pilot refusing to abandon stranded passengers. Medical workers treating patients for days without rest. Engineers risking their own safety to repair damaged stations. The galaxy was changing. Old rivalries no longer seemed important. Survival had become everyone's common goal. Still, the cost was enormous. Entire economies struggled. Resources became limited. Many worlds faced shortages. Fear and exhaustion affected everyone. Some citizens questioned whether resistance was even possible. Others demanded surrender, despite not knowing who or what they would surrender to. Human leaders understood those fears. They understood because humans had experienced difficult times throughout their own history. They knew people needed more than weapons. They needed hope. Broadcasts from Earth reached millions of worlds. The message remained simple. Stay united, protect one another, do not give up. Those words spread across countless systems. People repeated them in shelters. Teachers shared them with students. Families held on to them during uncertain nights, and slowly they became more than words. They became a promise. Meanwhile, inside one of humanity's largest research facilities, scientists studying recovered data noticed something strange. Certain patterns kept appearing. At first, they believed it was random. But after weeks of analysis, the evidence became impossible to ignore. The enemy had weaknesses, small ones, difficult to understand, but weaknesses nevertheless. Human researchers immediately informed military command. Teams from dozens of species joined the investigation. Every expert available was called. For the first time since the crisis began, something new entered the discussions. Possibility. Maybe the enemy was not unstoppable. Maybe there was a way to fight back. The discovery spread carefully through the highest levels of the Alliance. Nobody wanted false hope, but the evidence continued growing. As scientists worked tirelessly, commanders began preparing for a different future, not just survival, victory. Still, reaching that goal would require something nobody had attempted before. It would mean entering territory already consumed by the mysterious force. It would require extraordinary risks, and many experts warned that failure could bring the end of everything. Yet despite those dangers, volunteers started coming forward. Not only humans, pilots, engineers, researchers, and rescue workers from every corner of the galaxy offered their help. Because after everything they had endured together, people no longer thought in terms of separate civilizations. They thought of one future, one chance, one final opportunity. And somewhere deep inside enemy-controlled space, hidden among the darkness that had terrified the galaxy for so long, the answer everyone had been searching for was waiting. Humanity had finally discovered how to make the unknown enemy vulnerable. Now they only had to reach it. And that would be the most dangerous mission ever attempted. For the first time since the crisis had begun, hope started spreading across the galaxy. Not because the danger had disappeared, not because anyone believed victory would come easily, but because human scientists and their allies had finally discovered something they had been searching for since the first systems went dark. The mysterious force that had terrified entire civilizations was not invincible. It had weaknesses. The discovery came after months of studying damaged equipment, strange energy readings, and information recovered from abandoned regions. Thousands of researchers from different species had worked together without rest. Piece by piece, they had finally uncovered a pattern. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The problem was that using this information would require an operation unlike anything ever attempted before. The source behind the attacks was hidden deep inside enemy-controlled space. Getting there would be dangerous. Returning would be even harder, and nobody could guarantee success. Inside the Galactic Council, silence filled the chamber as experts explained the plan. Many representatives understood the risk immediately. If the mission failed, the enemy would continue advancing. There would be no second chance. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Then something unexpected happened. Volunteers started coming forward. Pilots offered their ships. Scientists offered their knowledge. Engineers volunteered to join repair teams. Medical workers prepared emergency units. People from dozens of species stood up one after another. Nobody forced them. Nobody demanded it. They simply believed that the future was worth fighting for. Humanity led the operation, but this mission belonged to everyone. Across the galaxy, citizens watched the announcements. Families gathered around news screens. Schools paused lessons. Factories stopped for a few minutes. People everywhere listened carefully. Many were frightened. Some cried. Others simply sat quietly, knowing that history itself was about to change. On Earth, cities organized support programs for families whose loved ones would participate in the mission. Children drew pictures for pilots and rescue workers. Communities gathered supplies. Messages of encouragement arrived from worlds that had once considered humans nothing more than another young species. Now those same worlds looked toward humanity with trust. Not because humans were perfect, but because they had never given up. As preparations continued, human shipyards worked day and night. Engineers checked every system. Supply crews loaded equipment. Scientists reviewed calculations thousands of times. Nobody wanted mistakes. There was too much at stake. Despite the pressure, people tried to hold on to normal life. Families ate dinner together. Friends shared memories. Parents hugged children a little longer before leaving for assignments. Nobody knew what tomorrow would bring. But one thing had become clear. Fear no longer controlled them. Unity did. When the day finally arrived, millions watched as the combined fleet began its journey. Ships from hundreds of civilizations moved together. Different designs, different technologies, different cultures, but one purpose. For the first time in history, the galaxy truly stood united. The sight alone brought tears to many people. Generations had spent centuries divided by politics and pride. Now they traveled together toward the unknown. The journey itself was difficult. Communication became unreliable. Navigation systems faced strange interference. Several support vessels experienced technical problems. Repair teams worked constantly to keep the fleet moving. Nobody complained. Everyone understood the importance of the mission. As they entered regions where countless ships had previously disappeared, tension grew. Every crew member understood the danger. Yet nobody turned back. Human commanders remained calm. Years of preparation had taught them that panic solved nothing. Their focus helped keep the alliance steady, and their confidence inspired everyone around them. Back home, ordinary people waited anxiously. Restaurants displayed live updates. Schools organized special broadcasts. Entire communities gathered in public centers. Even people who had once mocked the Galactic Council's warnings now prayed for success. The arrogance that had once divided civilizations had disappeared. Reality had changed everyone. Deep inside the dangerous region, the Alliance finally reached its destination. The strange readings matched the scientists' predictions. After years of uncertainty, they had found the center of the mystery. What happened next would decide the future of billions. Teams worked carefully. Engineers monitored systems. Researchers confirmed calculations. Pilots held their positions. Every second felt longer than the last. Then the operation began. Across the fleet, crews focused completely on their tasks. There was no cheering, no celebrations, only determination. For several tense moments, nobody knew whether the plan had worked. Then something changed. Strange signals that had confused scientists for years suddenly began weakening. Sensors showed unusual fluctuations. Communication systems improved. For the first time since the crisis had begun, experts witnessed something they had never seen before. The enemy was retreating. At first, many thought the readings were wrong, but more reports confirmed the same thing. The impossible was happening. The mysterious force that had spread fear throughout the galaxy was collapsing. Inside command centers, exhausted crews stared at their screens in disbelief. Some people cried. Others simply smiled silently. Years of fear, years of uncertainty, years of sacrifice. And now, finally, hope was becoming reality. Back on Earth and countless other worlds, celebrations erupted. Families embraced each other. Children laughed. Communities filled the streets. People who had spent months living in shelters looked toward the stars with tears in their eyes. The nightmare was ending. But for many, the emotions were complicated. There was happiness. But there was also sadness. Entire worlds had suffered. Millions had been forced to leave their homes. Countless families had spent years separated. Nobody celebrated those losses. Instead, people remembered the courage shown during the darkest times. They remembered rescue workers, doctors, pilots, engineers, teachers, volunteers. Ordinary people who had refused to abandon one another. The galaxy had survived because countless individuals had chosen kindness over fear. Weeks later, the surviving leaders gathered once again inside the Galactic Council. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. Gone were the arguments and pride. Gone were the accusations. Everyone understood how close they had come to disaster. Many leaders openly admitted their mistakes. They acknowledged that they had ignored the warnings. They had dismissed the evidence. And because of that, millions had suffered. They also acknowledged another truth. Humanity had listened. Humanity had prepared. Humanity had helped everyone, including those who had criticized them. Yet human representatives made no demands. They asked for no rewards, no territories, no special privileges. Their message remained simple. Learn from the past. Stand together. Never allow pride to blind the galaxy again. Those words touched many civilizations. People who once underestimated humans now respected them deeply, not because of power, but because of character. Humanity had proven that true strength came from responsibility and compassion. Years passed. Destroyed systems were rebuilt. Trade routes reopened. Families finally returned home. Children born after the crisis grew up hearing stories about the great alliance that had saved civilization. Schools taught the lessons of those difficult years, the importance of listening, the danger of arrogance, the value of unity. On Earth, life slowly returned to normal. Parks became crowded again, cities grew. People focused on dreams instead of survival. And every year, communities across the galaxy held remembrance events, not to celebrate war, but to honor cooperation. Former enemies sat together. Old rivals became trusted friends. Species that had once distrusted one another now shared knowledge and culture. The crisis had changed everyone, and perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. One evening, many years later, children visiting a museum on Earth stopped in front of a large display showing the United Fleet. One young visitor asked a simple question. Why did everyone trust humanity? An elderly guide smiled softly. Because humans listened when others laughed. Because they prepared when others ignored the danger. Because they helped when others blamed. And because when the galaxy needed hope the most, humanity chose to stand beside everyone instead of above them. The children looked at the stars displayed above the exhibit. To them, the story sounded unbelievable. But for those who had lived through those years, the memory remained clear. They remembered how pride had nearly destroyed everything. They remembered the warning that many had dismissed. And they remembered how the same civilizations that once ignored the Galactic Council eventually learned a lesson they would never forget. Humanity had not made them pay through revenge. Humanity had made them pay through truth, by surviving, by leading, and by proving that responsibility mattered far more than pride. That lesson would echo across the stars for generations to come.